Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor Singapore. It's the 31st of October, the year's whizzing by really quickly, and we've got 2 months left to the end of the year. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming out of Singapore. Now, Vishnu, it's always great to have you every Monday.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's a great way to start the week.
Now, before we get your insights, Vishnu, we'll take a look at how the crypto markets are performing, and then we'll take a look at regional stock markets. Now, Bitcoin is at 20,562. It's now down 0.9%. Ethereum is at 1,589.53. Now, looking across the regional stock markets, we start with the SGX, which is up a whopping 2.17%. Bursa Malaysia is up 1.16%. Shanghai bucks the trend, it's down 0.11%. The ASX All Ordinaries is down 0.99%. The Nikkei is up 0.58%. The Hang Seng is up 1.04%. And rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is up 1.05%. Now, Vishnu, what's your view on this sterling market performance, especially out of Singapore?
Well, it does look like, we've got the impact of the slew of earnings coming through, as well as, the continued hopes of the Fed pivot that has seen a strong finish in the US. We do see some of that carryover momentum, though, as you pointed out, with some of the other markets down under, so on and so forth. There are also signs of a little bit of caution creeping in. If at the very least, we could see a little bit more restraint on optimism until markets hear the verdict from the Fed. Even though they've been pricing in a Fed that's about to slow its pace of hikes and hence, really ratcheting higher on the optimism.
Yeah, so I think a 75 basis point rise is pretty much baked in terms of investors' minds, isn't it?
It very much is. In fact, I don't think markets are even fussing over what the rate decision will be for November. So this week's meeting, they 75 basis point is the runaway consensus. I think on the fringe, you have got perhaps the fringe bets on a 50 or 100. So unless you get that kind of a large surprise, I think markets are going to pay a lot more attention after the Wall Street Journal article that November, the FOMC will be discussing some dial back or looking at a dial back in the pace of rate hikes. So I think really the language they're looking for will be on the Fed's thoughts and triggers for them to dial back the pace and the amplitude of the hikes. Our take on it, though, is that it's a bit overdone, the optimism around this, because the Fed, from the outset, have said 75 basis point is not usual. Granted, if they do it this week, it'll be the fourth one that makes it a habit. So you can't say it's unusual. But the fact is, this was the game plan to really front load it and then wait and watch in 2023. So we should not be surprised by the Fed slowing down in December or shortly after, nor should we be too carried away with the optimism, because the more important aspect of this is the for higher part of the rate outlook. I think markets and the Fed have both converged between 4.5% to 5%. It is really about the for longer part that there's no convergence, and I think we're getting carried away.
Now, Vishnu, this morning we had a slew of PMI data out of China, and the print came in at under 50, came in at 49.2 for the factory activity, and the official non-manufacturing PMI came in at 48.7. How is this impacting oil prices, particularly with the global gloom across many markets besides China?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because especially when they contrast this with the upside surprise that we saw in China's industrial production data that came through for September, and that also coincided with a slight upside surprise in Q3 GDP. So I think there's going to be a reassessment to say this zero COVID policy and some of the uncertainty is going to be a drag, and there is not a clean inflection and escape velocity from here. And that knock-on impact on oil would be somewhat negative, because the expectations of demand recovering much more rapidly from China, that needs to be reassessed. Though that said, I just want to stress the point that the oil picture continues to be complex due to the geopolitics of the supply side dynamics, as well as still hopes for tourism reopening globally, and against one more, which is the Fed pivot. And in this sense, this is literally a pivot, because whether the Fed sounds hawkish or dovish can have a huge impact on oil prices.
Now, what is then the view of Asian central banks? Are they also looking, because many central banks have been laggards in Asia, particularly uh, Bank Negara of Malaysia, for example. What's your view on this if another 75 basis points takes place this week?
So, like we were discussing, the 75 basis point looks like a given. And so the risk now, and the real risk around this, is the Fed comes out and says, yes, we are looking at dialing back, but that doesn't necessarily mean now, and our job is not done. So if they continue to stress that, look, there are very sticky components of inflation, and we continue to fret about inflation, implying that there can be more upside, then we in EM Asia, that we could feel some of the ripples from that, either, in fact, not either, probably both, via higher interest rates and a higher dollar. Almost tellingly, just late last week, the Reserve Bank of India said they're meeting this week. So it's an off-cycle meeting, very coincidentally, just the day after the Fed. So it looks like they are bracing for any surprises there, and they want to act on time so that they don't wait another month and it doesn't cause too much of a market upset. So this is our interpretation of it, but it's highly likely. In that same vein, I think the BNM could perhaps do 25 and convince markets that they have everything under control. But in a worst case scenario, a 50 basis point hike may be a better stabilizing factor and a better balance given the ringgit weakness that we've seen. So a 50 basis point move might be a more ideal and more optimal trade-off.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video and podcast will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.